Welcome to the Cove Podcast, your stop for PME on the go.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Cove Podcast. I'm Captain Todd Lempey, your regular host. On today's episode, we're going to shift. I think we've done history and some other different things. Philosophy, we did a Talisman Sabre episode. We had Siak on, who's absolutely awesome about advice. But I think we're going to shift tack to some more tangible and practical skills now. This week's episode's on the philosophy behind physical training and how we should look at PT, the PT that we conduct in units and anywhere we are across the world, but also individual PT. My guest today is the WOPTI at RMC Duntroon, Warrant Officer Class 2 Tavis Nicholson. Welcome to the podcast.
G'day, sir. Thanks for having me.
This has been in the works for a while and you're super passionate about the topic. We've got a lot to cover in a short period of time, but let's get into it. But before we do get to how important physical training is, and it seems like a no shit statement, right? It's incredibly important to what we do, but I want to zero in on that a little bit later on. Before we do that though, you've started your career as an infantryman in 2RAR up in Townsville, and then you subsequently saw the light and wanted to become a PTI. You've posted to the ADF School of Special Operations. We'll make a few links there as well, and started what has now become the Human Performance Wing. Before we get to all that though, let's take back to Private Nicholson marching into your first battalion as a keen rifleman. I suppose, how was PT done at that point decades ago?
Yeah, so getting to the battalion as an 18-year-old, 60-kilo ring and wet individual, it was pretty humbling to say the least.
I think I weighed 60 kilos when I got to my first unit as well.
Yeah. Like many of us do.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly it was at that time the battalion was just they'd sort of been in Timor previously, and there were a lot of senior guys in the unit there. So I was just really trying to keep up with them, put my best foot forward as a new guy in the unit. And I think PT was one of those areas that you know, as a new guy, you could certainly put your best foot forward. There was plenty of push-ups, pull-ups, snake bites, run around the ring road for something different. We'd just run the opposite way around the ring road. Pack March Fridays, all those kind of bits and pieces. So some of those things that are still, you know, in the units today. But yeah, it was an interesting time to get there, and it certainly led to my passion in physical fitness and wanting to get better, and ultimately ended up in the job that I'm in today.
Yeah, so like before we get to you and why you become a PTI, so I suppose you get to your first unit and the secos are these, like, I don't know, but the scary individuals that you
Absolutely.
get there and you're trying to prove yourself. Like, and you talked about that. One way of doing that is physical training because it's quantitative, right?
Yep.
If you're in front of everyone else, you're winning, okay? So
Yep.
you might not be the best at nav, comms, all that sort of stuff, but if you can smash them in physical PT, that's how you get runs on the board, I suppose.
For sure.
How difficult were the secos at the time, and like how then inherently, how difficult was it? Every single training session was as hard as it could be.
Yeah, so certainly that was sort of the mentality back then. And in hindsight now, I look at it and that's probably not the most optimal way to train with years of experience and plenty of runs under the belt, which I'm sure we'll get to later on in today's episode. But yeah, that was certainly the mentality, was just leave it all on the floor and not take into consideration anything else throughout the rest of the day. It was just put your best foot forward there and leave it all on the floor.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Okay, so we shift tack. So spent 7 years as a infantryman in the battalions, deployed a number of times, and it was a different time, incredibly busy.
Yes.
So then you suppose you see the PTIs in the units, you get first exposed to them and stuff, and you get more and more experience, like you talked about with physical training. What sort of incentivised you to move to the PTI stream and transfer?
Yeah, so I think as you spoke about, that was a really busy time in the battalion. So I was fortunate enough to deploy quite early on in my career to Iraq in 2006 and then Afghan again in 2007 and 2008. We had some really good PTIs in the units at that time. It was a little bit of a different setup. They were sort of organic to the units back then, which I think was really, really good. Shout out to Damien King, Sarge Damien King, if you're listening. He was the Sarge PTI there at the time, and he sort of took me under his wing, saw something in me, I guess. And I'd always had a passion around physical fitness and sport, and I'd actually, prior to joining the military, was going to go to uni and be a sports, a PE teacher. So in a roundabout way, I kind of got there. But yeah, certainly busy time. I still wanted to continue and serve in Army there, but I probably was sort of getting to the end of my tether within the battalion and the grind and the churn that was, and saw PT and PTIs as an avenue to continue to serve. And here we are, sort of 13 years later.
you talked about a passion and the purpose for physical training and stuff before. I want to make that link and draw it back out. But so you see this as an important thing, and you wanted to study it before DFR got you into being a rifleman. So you get to transfer to PTI. If we come back to that purpose of physical training and why it's so important in the Army, can we talk to that? Like, why is it important to us and not so important to, a civilian workforce on the outside?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, at the crux of it, our war's a fundamentally human endeavour. It always has been, and it always sort of will be. So, obviously in the modern way, innovation, technology and equipments and tactics will continue to supplement warfare, but a human in most instances is required to drive, fly, that platform or operate that equipment to achieve the tactical effect. That's often done in austere environments, under prolonged stress and all those other bits and pieces. So a person's physical ability is intrinsically linked to their ability to do that. So yeah, it's one of the most important things, and obviously declaring my bias 100%.
Yeah. Asking a barber for a haircut. That's right. Yeah.
So it's, in my eyes, it's one of the most important things, and I guess I'll link that to I often paraphrase a quote I heard one time. I can't remember where it was. It was in the sporting context, but I sort of look at it like our greatest capability is our soldiers' availability and also their durability, and both of those things are intrinsically linked to their physical ability and physical fitness.
Yeah, I think, and it links to some of the other episodes we did. Colonel Young talked about the sort of, as we get into the World War II, we get into the Pacific, and not to take it back to the history, but we get into the Pacific and we start fighting in hard terrain against a hard enemy. And the average age of COs starts to move down till they're in their late 20s. Before we get into how people are still playing AFL late into their, to make the tentative leap to elite sport.
Yep.
Before we get to that, can we just talk about, so ADF School of Special Operations, you're in the inception of the Human Performance Wing, which was not that then. Sort of what did you come into then SOTEC, sort of with the role of doing? What was your task at SOTEC at the time? And I suppose, what did you learn in the special operations community?
Yeah, certainly. So I was super privileged to go to SOTEC on promotion as the Sarge PDI there. And at that time, it was a standalone posting, and the Human Performance Wing as we know it now. And I know you've had Campo and Benny on, two good friends of mine, to talk all about that, so I won't steal all their thunder. But yeah, it was just a sergeant physical training instructor position, and with the primary role of running the selection, Special Forces entry testing and selection at 2 Commando. And it was quite a challenging environment. It wasn't resourced to the point that it is now, but I was certainly there at a time where there were some really good people in the organisation that sort of backed me in the vision that we had to build the Human Performance Wing, and we capitalised on that. I certainly was there and formed with a small group of people at the start, and it's obviously grown leaps and bounds since then. So it's really great to sort of be on the outside looking in now and see how those guys have taken it leaps and bounds moving forward.
I think that epitomises the story you told just before we got on air about getting your first sort of package of gym equipment. What was it?
Yeah, so when I first got there was a couple of pallets of 200 torsion bars, which was really great for selection, but not so great for human performance moving into the reinforcement cycle and so forth. So yeah, like I said, really, really fortunate to be there and be backed by some really, really good people that could see the vision and wanted to grow it, and could see that hey, physical performance and physical training, along with the technical and tactical side of that cycle, was a really, really important thing.
I've just derailed you a little bit with the pallets of torsion bars and having no infrastructure and trying to make it work.
Yeah.
Like many people across Army will be like, oh, I have nothing and I've been told to make this work. You were the same.
Yes.
I suppose if we go back to what sort of things did you take from School of Special Operations, selection, reinforcement training cycle, recovery, and lessons learnt along the way before you post back into the massive, so your next posting is through brigade, this massive brigade. What sort of lessons did you take from that time, starting and going through all that process?
Yeah, so I think, and you just touched on one of them there, obviously being recovery. And as you spoke to, with Benny and Campo, that recovery week is now embedded into the reinforcement cycle, and they're sort of really being forward leaning in that and recognizing that that's an important part of not just physical training, but the recovery process behind it. And I guess that links to probably the biggest factor that I took out of it was bringing into the consideration of all other factors of the training program and all of the other cumulative stress just outside of PT. Because that's important, and PT in its simplest form is simply stress. And we apply, from a physical training perspective, we apply a certain stress to the body in a specific modality, whether it is that aerobic capacity, strength, or whatever it may be, and we allow that sufficient time to recover and adapt. So my time in SOCOM sort of reinforced the requirement to consider all of those external facets, not just my physical training session, in developing the physical training program moving forward.
Yeah, because I think we compartmentalise. PT in the morning is supposed to be as hard as it can be, and you all work together at the same standard no matter where you're at, and then you ignore everything else that you do from the remainder of the day.
Absolutely. Yeah, we often take a very insular outlook of physical training, and we forget the wider context and the occupational settings. We're not like a professional sporting team that our whole week is designed around that game day on Saturday. Like, people are required to do their job day in, day out. And a lot of times that's physical in nature. So that adds added stress to it, and impacts your physical training session and your programming moving forward. So yeah, that's probably the biggest takeaway, and it's applicable not only in the Special Forces community and the SOCOM in the reinforcement cycle, but I would suggest even more so in a combat brigade like 3 Brigade in my time up there, and all of those operational units.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because you get to the special operations component and you think that the thing that you took away, or the large part you took away, is to slow down, basically, to recover, right? And think more about the holistic, everything you're doing per day. That's interesting, because you're at the pointy end and you're slowing down is not what you said, but basically
it's just being more intentional.
Yeah, way more intentional, yeah.
Yep.
So we get to 3 Brigade, and you're looking out over this massive brigade. There's thousands of soldiers on base, and everyone is doing, like you said before, I'm sure it's changed now, but Monday Run Day, because it rhymes. So the entire brigade is out running across Laverack Barracks.
It's still a thing.
Yeah. And then circuit, sport, and then a pack march on Friday. How do you approach the 3 Brigade posting, large scale? What sort of things are you taking in, and how are you approaching that posting?
Yeah, so it was certainly interesting. Like you said, having been out of the brigade for a little while and getting back, it is a big beast. Unfortunately, in that brigade, we had 13 PDIs to, service all of the combat units there, and over sort of 5,000 people or whatever it was. So it was certainly sort of taking it back, like a back step in the first instance, and just seeing how things roll, building those relationships with the command teams and rapport and bits and pieces. Because you're essentially sometimes can be seen as an outsider, trying to wedge yourself in there. Fitness leaders are really integral to us delivering our capability across those sort of bigger, larger brigades and stuff like that. We just don't have the PDI workforce to take every person for every lesson. So yeah, it was sort of like looking at it. Overwhelming is probably one word to look at it.
Coming from the only person, and I'm sort of in a shed at SOTEC, to then going a wing and getting more resources, obviously, to then 3 Brigade.
Yeah.
Massive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, but I think a lot of the stuff that I did learn in my time at SOTEC and ADFSSO, and talking back to that previous fact of looking at more broadly at all of the sort of occupational stresses that people go through, and linking that back to our physical training program. So it certainly held me in good stead. And I guess it sort of built off my philosophy, which we can talk to and go down that rabbit hole, pull that thread if we want to go there. But, I'm quite a simple bloke. I come from a simple background, and I try and look at physical training in its most simplest form. As I said, it's stress, and we need to know the demands. So you need to know what the occupational demands of each individual unit, their battle rhythm, all of those bits and pieces play. You need to know a baseline of where people sit in most physical capacities in, aerobic capacity, muscular endurance, muscular strength, the sort of 3 that jump out, and then train the gap. So that, if you know the demands and you know the baseline of where your people sit, that gap will inform your training program moving forward.
And when you talk about, not to go too much into the development side of the house, but when you talk about baseline, sort of, you're not talking about like completely starting and retesting the whole unit and stuff, or are you talking about that at certain points? How does it sort of getting that baseline before you start to look at what we need to achieve? How's that best achieved?
So I think certainly there is value in those sort of testing blocks periodically throughout the training year, and it's all dependent on your battle rhythm and stuff. If we look at it, most of the times at the start of the year, it's probably a good time to sort of baseline your individuals, noting that some people will train over that Christmas break.
Most people should, yeah. Yep.
Most people should.
Yeah.
Some people won't. That's all good. They'll get found out come January. But certainly it's important to do some baseline testing there. And that's going to be based off your analysis on what they actually need to do. So knowing the demands. It's also going to be based off your resourcing and other bits and pieces. There's a million different tests and a million different ways you can skin the cat to get after it. But, if we look at it in its most simplest form, Army has its assessments, right? The basic fitness assessment and the PESA. They're probably pretty good baselines, and you'll get some good results out of those that will inform your baseline of the individuals in those capacities required. And then you can move forward from there. But also, not just looking at individual tests and testing periods, look at the training year as a whole. If you look at exercises coming up, ultimately that's what we train to do. Physical training is to make sure that you're able to do the occupational task. Did you get through that exercise without getting injured? Did you perform to the standard required? All of those kind of things. That in itself is your test.
You talked about not getting too far into the philosophy just before, but I think we should talk about that. Not so much how you view it, but how PT has changed over that time. Decades, we sort of talked about the similarities. We've already identified them: Monday run day, pack march on Friday, and Sportos on a Thursday afternoon. But if we go back to what have you seen over your course as a PTI and prior, what has sort of physical training gone through with Army?
Yeah, so I think there's certainly, like you said, there are a lot of similarities, and there are a lot of things that haven't changed. And organisationally, sometimes we probably do things because that's the way we've always done it. And in PT, that can certainly be the case. But I think we've started to identify that things like I think about the battalion, and when I first got there, recovery was a dirty word. We don't do that. You do that on the weekend. We've started to look at it more holistically about the individuals, factoring in recovery, looking at different ways that we can train things like push up, pull up, snake bite. Great session, but we probably don't need to do it 3 times a week. Is there another way that we can, implement some of the stuff and, strength and conditioning modalities from sport and other, bits and pieces and make that applicable to our context. But I think that's the important thing, is making sure that it's applicable to the context and having that understanding behind it, and not just trying to wedge an AFL strength and conditioning program into a cavalry regiment or an infantry battalion or a CISB. That just won't work. Yeah.
Before we get to that, because I want to dwell on that point with the elite, taking an elite sports program and trying to overlay it onto an a training year that you don't know what it's going to look like and stuff. Before we get to that point, some of the things that I've seen. So at the start, when I started my career, we didn't have unit gyms, a lot of lifting equipment. Then we started to get all this resourcing for a significant amount of lifting equipment. Then here comes Run Army. And then we start running at Zone 2 and running. It's been absolutely awesome. Run Army is an excellent event. And it's awesome to be a part of the program and stuff. But what sort of fads, and I use the term fads not in a negative way, but I just mean what have we grabbed onto throughout history?
For sure.
For physical training.
And I think we've certainly been influenced by those societal changes and trends, like you just said, and the high intensity training, leave it all on the floor every time workouts. We're certainly popular for a time period. The Zone 2 long and slow approach, as you've said, is trendy now. We went through a phase where strength was king. That was probably when all of the units started all of the guys started back squatting 3 times a week and then couldn't run out of sight on a dark night. But we certainly have been influenced by societal changes and other random bits and pieces. But I think that's our job and our role as PDIs, is to look at that and certainly capture some of that enthusiasm behind it, because we want people to train right. But it certainly shaped them towards that's all well and good. And, when they'll 5-3-1 might say you need to squat bench dead. You need to increase your lifts by 2.5 kilos every session, or it's just not worth it. Don't even do that session. But that doesn't take into context all of the occupational stresses, other stresses, the work environment and your actual job. So that's our job as PDIs, is to take those little golden nuggets and threads and pull them from all of those different sort of fads and, elite sport, all of the strength and conditioning sort of world, and put that into a workable piece and solution applicable to our occupational context.
Yeah. So you just talked about how complex it is to sort of design that and how complex it is to look at PT in that way, not just taking fads and just running with things and binging basically on certain elements of heavy lifting and getting absolutely massive, but you can't run at all or something like that.
Yep.
That's the sort of what's changed, grabbing onto a couple of fads and stuff and like sort of looking at it and grabbing things from the civilian world. I think if we do talk about the civilian world first, there has been a lot of media coverage of late, especially in the AFL side of the house with Collingwood at Geelong playing. So I think Collingwood in April played the average oldest team of. They set a record having the oldest team. These players that would otherwise sort of retired in their late 20s and early 30s are now playing well into the sort of like past the age of 30, and these teams are getting able to play for so much longer. What sort of developments have happened in the elite sports? Knowing that you have had a little bit of exposure to each different program, like what sort of advancements are happening in the elite sports world?
Yeah, so I think sports science first and foremost is adapting, and it's grown in leaps and bounds, probably more so in the last decade than any other sort of preceding decade there. And the strength and conditioning coaches are able to have so much objective information. Like I think I touched on it before, like looking down to how many high speed running meters a person plays, completes over a game. And all that kind of stuff. So they're able to adapt their training loads based off that objective performance metrics. And probably coming back to one of the things we talked about previously as well, it's not just doing things the way that they've always done it. Like it's looking at it, and the longer and the older that people are, they've now got this training age behind them. They're probably carrying some injuries, some niggles and other random bits and pieces. So looking really objectively, what do they need and what is the minimum effective dose of that stress that we need to apply to them to keep them progressing, but not put them in that state of overtraining or take away from their ability to perform on the weekend. So, yeah, and it probably talks back to that philosophy again. It's like knowing the demands, knowing where that person sits as their baseline, and then they just fill in the gaps. They train the gap.
So if we come back to the difficulty, so most people would be like, there's so much sports science out there and it's come so far.
Yes.
Why don't we just take elite sports like programs and just overlay them onto the brigade's training plan? Yeah.
So I think I sort of probably touched on it a little bit there before, but it's all context dependent. So if you look at, and I've been fortunate enough over my career to sort of, run some camps for some of the elite sporting teams and rugby teams, and spent some time with the AIS through the gold medal ready program in my time in SOCOM, which was an amazing opportunity and really, really eye-opening, and sort of opened up plenty of doors to see the other side and that elite sports side of the house. And certainly I took a lot away from it, but it has to fit the context of the organisation. Whereas an AFL team or an AFL strength and conditioning program, their sport is quite simple in the fact that it's bound by time, like, almost down to the minute. They can tell you how many high-speed running minutes people run and all those kind of bits and pieces. So there's a lot of objective data there and baselining that they know, and then they can sort of really tailor their program towards that. We don't have that luxury. We have some really good data and some some good objective measurements of occupational sort of stuff through all the PESA research and stuff like that as well. So we do have a good understanding, probably not as granular as like an AFL team, but we need to overlay that in just that normal unit battle rhythm. So I've made the mistake, and as many people have probably done, of trying to just run a strength and conditioning program straight out of a textbook in an operational unit. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think you made the argument again before we come on air that in training it can be slightly easier to be more scripted, right? But then we get to, so you're currently the WOPTI at RMC, you probably script things down to the second, right? Because you can blocks of training and stuff. It's far easier. Is it easier? I suppose different challenges, but easier coming back to training and sort of teaching training officers how to sort of prepare and get to the end state, which is graduating fit.
Yeah, for sure. So I think like the beauty of a training establishment has its schedule of demands is known. So the training program is pretty well locked in. There's a lot of learning objectives that the ladies and gents have to go through and so on and so forth. So yeah, we can be really intentional with our programming and setting them up for success. Our testing batteries now are prior to sort of like key battle blocks to inform risk of staff cadets and stuff moving forward. So, but in an operational unit, as you know, they're quite reactive, and you can have a training program and then 2 days into that week, that training program's out the window because something else has come up. So it is a really big balancing act. It's sort of the art and science of programming. There is no one program that suits all, and you know, if someone's got it out there, please send it my way, and we'll roll with it. But it's taking all of the bits and pieces and knowledge and, you know, facets of different organizations and overlaying that onto our context. That's the real art of sort of programming for tactical populations, and especially in Army.
Yeah. I think for me, when I don't moonlight as a podcast host, obviously I'm an instructor at ADFA, and there's strict blocks of 8 week time. Like we do battle PT for 8 weeks, and that leads up to a military sort of test in a way. It's called a mil skills competition. Then we do 8 more weeks of long, slow distance running, and we do the cross country.
Yeah.
Then we do 8 more weeks of swimming, and then we do the swimming carnival. Like it's very scripted and easy to do.
Yeah.
That will not last any sort of time in battalions that are being pulled every way, which way, and the sync matrix is unclear and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So I think also in a training command, and you know, with those schedule of known demands, you can probably be more akin to, I guess, like traditional strength and conditioning modalities, because you're building capacities, you have, you know, and it's important to do that. And then when you transition into an operational unit, it's more of a concurrent approach. So when I say concurrent, that's, you know, you can't sort of focus, just like you just said there, you couldn't do an 8 week block of just running in a battalion, for argument's sake. And so I always go back to the infantry battalion because that's sort of in my grounding. But looking at an infantry battalion, you couldn't just do 8 weeks of just long, slow distance running because you'd neglect all of these other stresses that are required for your occupation. So it just wouldn't work. So you have to have a concurrent approach and balance all of those things and look at it. And it might not be, you know, if you read the Wendler 531 strength and conditioning manual, it says you need to squat 2 times a week at a minimum. Like that might not just be feasible. But if you can follow like a minimum effective dose, if you can get a dose of stress in that modality, in that movement pattern, whatever it may be, that's just enough to elicit an adaptation, but it doesn't take away from the next training day, the training day after that, that's a more feasible and optimal approach.
You talked before about the role, and so we went back to an infantry battalion, and I want to go back to that example because we have a number of different people involved in delivering physical training. Obviously, you have authorised persons that are qualified to conduct it. We had fitness leaders, now ADF fitness leaders, and then PTIs as well. You talked about in the past definitely had organic PTIs to each unit. Now that's unfeasible. So we have fitness leaders as well. What's the ideal before we start to get into the next episode, which is probably designing a training program in a case study? How do they work together? How would you see in an ideal world that each of those roles would work together to deliver physical training for that infantry battalion? Yeah,
certainly. And I mean, they're integral to the way that we do business. Certainly out in the wider combat brigades. Ideally, you would almost have them as an extra Reggie, which it is anyway, within their unit, and that unit would identify that, and they might have a combat physical training cell where the CFLs can, you know, aggregate there and then provide that capability out to the unit. Because what we do see is, unfortunately, like in an infantry battalion or a CISB or whatever it may be, if I'm in trucks, for argument's sake, in CISB and I'm a CFL, like I only run PT for trucks. But really, I think that's doing a disservice because, you know, what if trucks has 10 fitness leaders and then the QSOR has none? So like aggregating them in almost a cell within a unit and then that providing that support to the unit. And it might be that truckie CFL is taking, you know, the cooks or supply or whatever it may be under the supervision of a PDR. I think that's a way that, you know, moving forward and in a perfect world, in the world according to TAV, that's the way that we would employ our CFLs. It's not always necessarily the case. Some units, and I had my time in Brisbane through 8-9, we had a really good relationship and we sort of set up a construct like that and it worked really, really well. But Yeah, and I think it enables, so that's you talking about the fitness leaders being able to get into each of and take different sessions and spread the love a bit. Yep.
The vice versa is the same. I imagine it's like far easier to link in with the PTI that is allocated to your unit across multiple units, but to get that advice and the programming and training is far easier if you're centralised in a unit.
Yeah, for sure. So like in that context, and sorry if I didn't explain all that clearly, the PTI would overarch and still develop the programming with the CFLs and fitness leaders executing, in and around the PTI executing as well. So, for argument's sake, in 3 Brigade, there was one PTI to a unit of sort of 500 people. It's just not feasible for them to take every lesson there.
Yeah.
They could take a company and they might see one of the companies one day of that week and the other four days is under the guise of the fitness leaders. But that program and that overarching program was developed by the PTI. So, it's certainly, we rely on them for the execution part. But I think sometimes a bit of a disservice is done, certainly to the trade, and declaring my bias here, PTIs can sometimes be underutilized in that capacity, and it can just be sort of over to the fitness leader who, let's be honest, they do like a 3-week course, and some of them might not have like the years of experience that the physical training instructors have, and then they're thrown in the deep end to sort of program. It can be sort of pretty overwhelming. I mean, I've been doing this job for 13 years now, and my programming is I'm still learning and evolving every day. So
yeah. So I suppose that's the role of sort of PTIs, and you made the argument that fitness leaders should be sort of centralised to give access and spread the love across a battalion or unit. You talked about a PTI designing a program for the unit, and then fitness leaders and authorised pers executing it. If we come back to it, all seems like a massive balancing act. We've got strength training, we need cardio, it's a finite number, it's all a zero-sum game. We need to recovery balance with field and courses. I suppose the implied task is that we need, in the training program, it just has the maximum benefit, and that's not the maximum heart rate for the whole time of the session, but the maximum benefit out of the program.
Yeah.
How should we go about actually training, and what should those programs look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really good question. And there's no definitive answer to that. But, as I spoke about before, there's no one program that suits all units, all individuals. Otherwise, we'd all be doing it. But I think it comes back to that awareness and knowing the baseline, knowing the demands, knowing where you kind of sit, and factoring in what we've spoken about at length today, and what is truly required from you as a tactical professional. So, knowing where you sit across the physical capacities required for you, and then tailoring that programming to balance the strengths and weaknesses. And as it sounds really hard, and it is. And as I've said before too, it's sort of a balance of the art and science behind it. But that's our job as physical training instructors, is to get into the weeds and know our units and be intimately involved with them. And come up with a plan around that. I'll use the example of the long, slow distance run. Really, really good tool. And zone 2 cardio, as we know, and it's in fad at the moment, which is great, is a really important component to physical fitness and building some aerobic capacity. But traditionally, in the way that we've probably attacked that is as a platoon or a section, we've just gone, it's an LSD. Let's go for 40 minutes. But we haven't factored in all of the individuals and their abilities in that section or the platoon. So
you're like 11 platoon form up on the road in 3 files, and we're going this way, shortest people to the front. And that
absolutely, yeah. And they're at zone 4, zone 5 and threshold just for 40 to 50 minutes, and then
unacclimatized as well because they've just got to Townsville, for example.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that kind of looks at, like, that's coming back to that. Don't be someone with just 1 year of experience repeated many times. Like, be someone with years of experience, and and I've made all of these mistakes, full disclosure as well. So but now with hindsight and now with years of experience, looking at like, okay, cool, we want to do that, that's important. How do we now tailor that into ability-based groups within that section? And you'll have the purists that will argue that PT is about teamwork and it's building, we've all got to do the same thing at the same time, and there's some merit to that, and there's some activities that you can do that. But if that takes away from the ultimate aim of physical training and building that capacity and really dialing in, the prescription and the stress to elicit the adaptation in that capacity, then we just end up in a goofy loop and we don't really get anywhere. So,
and it's ignoring the benchmark component you talked about before, completely ignoring it, basically.
Absolutely. And I mean, you look at today as well, like even when I think about my first time in the battalion, like heart rate monitors and the smartwatches, and like they weren't really a thing, but you look at now, everyone's got them. So using that long, slow distance as an example, you might say, hey, we got 30 minutes in the bank today. All right, like those, and you can use like your BFA scores or whatever baseline test that you've used. yeah, you guys are going to run at your pace, we're running at ours, and we'll all link up at the end. Because I sort of argue that post-PT, you're going to move into your platoon training program, your section training program, you're going to eat lunch, like you're going to build teamwork and all of these other facets of your occupation. PT is certainly a way that we can do that, but if that takes away from the ultimate aim of that PT session, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice.
Yeah, I think when we talked about making mistakes in the past, I think full disclosure, I've also made many across the time, but one of them is the fact that when you're a troop commander or platoon commander for the first time, or you're a company to IC and ADGE, you want everyone to do PT together, because it might be because you're criminally inefficient with what you're doing in your day job because you're just learning. You try to get everyone to do exactly the same thing, because then you can spend time with the whole platoon, right?
Yep.
That's important. Teamwork is important. And you acknowledge that before.
Yep.
Not every time, though. It needs to be.
Yeah, so
Sessions need to be tailored.
For sure. So certainly, like I argue, and we spoke to the point before, most units now, and certainly up in 3 Brigade, they have a unit gymnasium. So you're all still in that same training environment, and like PT and PDRs especially, it's a little bit different from a TE. I'm not out the front yelling change and knife handing people. It's, you more take an approach of a coach, right? So ladies and gents, here's the session, but you can look at it if it's a strength training session for argument's sake. Like there's different facets. You've got the private Nicholsons that are 60 kilos ring and wet. Like they just need to do some hypertrophy. Higher volume, lower intensity stuff. Just be intentional with that and try and build some muscle and size.
Despite how hard it is to put on.
Yeah. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum with the guys and girls that are absolute jets, right? Like they have a really good baseline level of strength. So they're just doing some maintenance stuff there. You've got, I can now put myself in this category, the older individuals there, that maybe the CSM or whatever it is with a dodgy back and whatever else it might be. Like they're going to have to be doing some different form of strength training. They might be squatting to a box instead of doing a full squat, or, anterior loaded with a kettlebell or whatever it may be. But I argue that you're still all in that same training environment and everyone's getting after it, but they're just getting after it in what they require rather than just the one size fits all approach.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome way and an excellent way point to end the episode, is the fact that that benchmark that you talked about, we know the demand, the benchmark component, and then applying that to groups, small groups, to get a better outcome for the entire session and the training program more broadly. Yeah,
absolutely. I think if you're consistent, you're intentional, you give yourself the best chance of remaining injury free and at the required physical standard needed to be good at your job and combat effective. And the only way that you can do that is really like taking those objective metrics and that baseline and knowing where you sit and then tailoring your training around that. You can achieve that in large groups, but it's still individualized. It's a balancing act, and it's there's no perfect solution to that problem. But I think we're certainly getting better at it, and it's the way forward in the way that we do business.
Absolutely awesome. So I suppose that's how we look at PT. Let's talk about how we actually do it in the subsequent episodes, because you have to come back on and we can riff through some more stuff. Warrant Officer Tavis Nicholson, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Cheers, sir. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Cove Podcast. Explore our channel for more great audio PME content. Also, visit us at cove.army.gov.au for hundreds of additional resources. The Cove, the learning home of the Australian profession of arms.